Recorded Books presents The Odyssey of Phillis Wheatley, A Poet's Journey Through American Slavery and Independence, by David Waldstreicher. Narrated by Kim Staunton. This program includes an appendix of anonymous poems, tentatively attributed to Phillis Wheatley, and additional historical notes from the author.
Author's Note. The term black was used relatively infrequently in late 18th century Anglo-America. Negro, which is no longer used in contemporary English, was used at least as often. Neither term was capitalized, even though many nouns and adjectives were inconsistently capitalized. In her poems and letters, Phillis Wheatley employed neither of these terms, both of which had negative and stereotypical implications when used by those who increasingly called themselves white. She regularly used African in referring to herself and others, and sometimes the less common word sable to refer to skin color as a modifier for race, which she used to refer to nations more than phenotypes. Wheatley preferred African and sable for political reasons. Their use over and against black or Negro pushed back against a rising tide of racism in her lifetime. In other words, she used African for some of the reasons that many today value and capitalize the term black. In deference to Wheatley, and to call attention to the changing and politicized signifiers of identity to which Wheatley responded, I use black sparingly in reference to how Wheatley's white contemporaries described Africans and their descendants, or when it is clear I mean those people for whom we now use black, or black retrospectively, and do not capitalize. But when I am referring to 19th, 20th, and 21st century persons who identified as black and use the term when referring to themselves and or to Wheatley, as in the last chapter of the book, I then capitalize. Chapter 1. The Beginnings, the Table, the Tale. Everyone around Boston knew about the storm at the end of August 1767. They knew what could happen in gales on the back of Cape Cod. Still, even after years in the coastal trade, the Nantucket merchants Hussey and Coffin had rarely felt such winds. By the grace of God, their schooner and their whale oil had made it safely to a Boston wharf, and they had returned to the fine house of their fellow trader, John Wheatley. The girl came with bowls, with bread. She did not sit at the table, but she listened. The Wheatleys already knew about her ear. The girl had some sort of gift. John's wife, Susanna, and their daughter, 18-year-old Mary, who had a twin brother but no living sisters, had taught her to read English. It wasn't hard. Soon after they purchased her off the slave ship Phillis in 1761, they had noticed her endeavoring to make letters upon the wall with a piece of chalk or charcoal. 4 years later, the 12-year-old penned an impressive letter to a Mohegan missionary who had stayed in their home. She had also written elegies about the deaths of respected men and verse appeals to lapsed Christians that the Wheatleys showed to their friends and neighbors. The poem Phillis began to write soon after that dinner, the first she published, addressed the near wreck and the Nantucket merchants. The occasion was standard stuff, especially in Massachusetts. Almost half a century earlier, an even younger Bostonian, the 12-year-old apprentice, named Benjamin Franklin, had published a ballad broadside about a capsized rowboat and the drowning of a family and their enslaved man. Less conventionally, Phillis addressed Hussey and Coffin directly in her poem. She asks rhetorical questions about their peril. Did fear and danger so perplex your mind as made you fearful of the whistling wind? It's not a dialogue. She doesn't quote their answers. She speaks of them, about them to some larger purpose. They
Sample complete. Ready to continue?